The Alexandrian Shift by Gary Ives. Read by Gary Ives. As Alexander the Great lay dying in Babylon, gods were summoned by Zeus to Mount Olympus. Well, there you have it. We imbue this mortal with a healthy dollop of our better attributes, strength, wit, an array of intelligences, and this is what it comes to. Before Alexander, diverse nations had collapsed as barley to the scythe, and then, as conqueror, he became loved by the vanquished. Like a welcome spring rain, knowledge, tolerance, and peace descended upon all. Hitherto, the only thing these idiots had ever understood was brutal conquest and slavery. Yet, when we provide them with a conqueror of the ages, a conqueror to teach them compassion and respect for differences, the best they can do is grumble, mutiny, and now this cowardly assassination, this unmanly poisoning of our dear Alexander, whom we had so engendered to fix their dark, broken world. What a wretched disappointment is mankind, promising, so capable, with music and poetry, to bring us, the gods, to tears. Yet that golden creativity is but thin plate over the base metals of perfidy, greed, and sustained, prevalent ignorance. Hades, I'm ready to turn the whole lot over to you. Athena rose. Father, may I suggest that mankind needs more time for the seeds that Alexander has sowed to germinate? Be specific. What seeds would you argue worthy of saving among such churls? Well, for instance, tolerance. In Persia, he personally paid the gambling debts of some 10,000 Macedonians and Greeks who agreed to marry Persians whom they disdained. Even as noblemen he encouraged to embrace former enemies. Once man learns tolerance, surely respect for others will ensue. Such marriages have yielded children sensitive to differences and with far more compassion than their fathers. Successive generations could continue to unfold benign, liberal, and kind-hearted. Ares interjected. Pardon me, Father, but those rotten scrubs in Susa are already drafting divorce decrees. I say these two hungry lice need a taste of their own Greek fire. Then Aphrodite stood and said, It's not too late to save Alexander. Let us, Father, save the one man whose actions reflected our better standards. The noble experiment need not end. I agree with Athena. Alexander was just beginning to master the power to reverse peevish hatred, guiding odium towards understanding. Save Alexander, I say. Hear, hear, chimed Hermes. While my intent was to scrap humankind, such a fetid dung heap has their world become, Athena, you and Aphrodite have spoken well. I too find enormous favor with Alexander. Though a mite too serious, he is too precious to include with that rabble. We shall welcome Alexander to Olympus with love and mirth. Though he will appear to mortals to die, we do now imbue him with immortality, but to sleep some 25 centuries. Then shall he awake, and should he please, once again, try to bring tolerance and understanding to the pigs and monkeys whose ancestors saw fit to poison him, and good luck with that. Athena, Aphrodite, Hermes, and all you gods who love him, from this day forward and ever after Alexander's awakening, you are forbidden to interfere in any and all affairs of miserable mankind. This is my command. Ganymede, fetch wine, boy. So spake Zeus. Awakening as a god in the year 1955, Alexander did not present himself among mortals. His old desire still burned within him. He wanted to unify the world under Hellenic ethics of honor, trust, duty, compassion, and a love of life through appreciation of knowledge and the respect of individuality. He noted that the Jesus thing and the Mohammed thing had failed miserably. From Mount Olympus he viewed the goings and comings all over the world. Athens had burgeoned into an initially unrecognizable polis, but he reckoned modernity by reviewing not the written history, which he knew to be mostly lies. Rather, he relied on his omniscient powers as a god to perceive all past actual events. Knowledge of the future was, however, denied him by Zeus. London, New York, Tokyo, Shanghai presented amazing intricacies of structures, economies, and myriads of social problems. New York he selected as the place to begin, and television as the medium to effect initial change, which he preferred to happen gradually. Television, which Alexander noted, exuded a hypnotic phenomenon. Enthralled viewers by the tens of millions sat mindlessly and motionless before the glowing, flickering images projected by the tubes in darkened rooms, receiving every few minutes messages to buy cigarettes, household cleaning products, automobiles, appliances, food for their dogs, personal hygiene items, analgesics, toys, stunning arrays of products, the consumption of which fueled the fervent economies of the Western nations. If shortages of consumer goods or incomes occurred, the people became restless and blamed their discomfort on minorities or socialists. Television was a chariot followed by legions of unthinking, consuming saps, eager to obey and quick to hate. What saps, Alexander thought. Beginning in January, each Monday night with the broadcast of the I Love Lucy program, the protagonist, Lucille Ball, began to appear slightly changed, darker, with fuller lips, breasts, and derriere. Her red hair stiffened into tight, dark curls. And it seemed as though her accent traveled 100 miles south each week. By June, Lucy was fully Negro in appearance and idiom. Studio makeup artists quickly realized the futility of applying pancake to Miss Ball's face. CBS executives' want of immediate action from minions were in disarray. But soon they learned of the similar inexplicable changes occurring at the other two networks. Gracie Allen quipped with her Negro husband George Burns. Robert Montgomery of Father's Knows Best had somehow fathered a family of mixed-race children. Bud, a Negro, his little sister Kitten, distinctly Asian. Harriet Nelson watched as her husband Ozzy's visage gradually eased in that of a tattooed Maori, while the two boys, David and Ricky, clearly became darling, mischievous Jamaicans. Popular Jackie Gleason lost inches of height each week, and by June was a fat, loudmouthed dwarf who drove a New York City bus and was married to a lovable communist pamphleteer. NBC News anchors Chet Huntley and David Brinkley closed each evening's news standing and saluting crossed American and Soviet flags during their program's theme, The International. Contestants on the popular quiz show, the $64,000 question, vied for money to buy tractors and fertilizers for third world agricultural communes of their choice. Concurrent to these changes, sales of cosmetics shifted to darker shades, favoring olive-skinned and black people. As the gradual darkening of her skin ensued, First Lady Mamie Eisenhower instructed her hairdresser to dump the bangs and effect the Lena Horne look. "Thank God," exclaimed her husband, President Eisenhower. In the big eastern countries of the Soviet bloc and China, television was not nearly as pervasive. And where it did exist in the large cities, its control was by the state, not by commercial interests. But there, as in the West, Alexander noticed how television easily dominated the minds of its viewers, who received messages not to purchase things, but to obey the will of the state, by affecting good citizenship, thrift, sobriety, and hard work. But with such advice came cautionary messages drenched in paranoia, warning of threats from spies, enemies, and traitors, while lauding the hero leaders and military sacrifices. As television receivers were quite expensive, viewers were mostly persons of greater privilege. Still, their time before the tiny flickering images was every bit as mesmerizing as the wicked commercial television of the greedy Western fascists plotting world dominion. In Moscow, the usual documentary films displaying racial tension and poverty in the West were aired with gradual modification. Gradually, the poignancy of poverty in Appalachia and on Indian reservations eased. Soon, happy, smiling Navajo children wore the red neckerchiefs of young pioneers. Threadbare overalls and flour sack dresses on starving West Virginia children slowly and quietly became neatly pressed practical denim overalls on smiling, well-fed folks, standing not before washpots and broken steps, but rather neat little cottages with flowered boxes. Rusted trucks and automobiles on cinder blocks gradually gained inflated tires and paintwork subtly. Fat politicians in sunglasses with fierce dogs straining at their leads to attack black protesters in Alabama found the sunglasses and belly fat replaced by slim, handsome People's Liberation Army officers bearing smiles and gifts of garden tools. Everywhere, posters adorned the sides of barns and buildings showing cross flags of the USSR and USA and the People's Republic of China, and on locomotives and tractors admired happy workers and farmers. Voiceovers told of the friendship gifts from the Soviet miners and steelworkers to the poor of Alabama and West Virginia. Did not the workers and soldiers of the Soviet Union generously strive to foster friendship among all nations? Rather soon, under the spell of television, the mid-level leaders in factories and state bureaucracies pushed for greater understanding and tolerance of the West as a better road to peace than the Cold War. A whispering campaign begun by television viewers spread among millions. The usual violent documentary films of the Great Patriotic War shifted to show the Red Army building bridges, roads, airfields, and other public works as the invading fascist enemy was shown to be gradually won over by the workers and peasants, surrendering arms with promises to invoke the miracle of peace and socialism upon their return home. The Red Army was gripped by confusion, but no one questioned the messages transmitted through television sets. What about the horrendous suffering of the war? The deaths, destructions, shortages, and privations the Soviet Union had suffered to liberate the world. Although these remembered facts clashed with the televised version, no one dare question the wisdom of the state. Amid this paradigm shift, the tremendous cost to the nation for the support of the military was being discussed by millions. Hushed circles of enlisted men and junior officers conspired. The slogan, "You've done your bit, comrade soldier, now go home and build peace and freedom," became ubiquitous. Graffiti from Vladivostok to Leningrad. Other popular graffiti such as "Tractors, not tanks, comrades," appeared simultaneously all over the East. American and British rock and roll music and mod fashions were seen and heard free from the usual derisive comments. Soon, Soviet and Chinese youth were supporting fantastic haircuts and colorful bell-bottoms and even miniskirts. And in the West, a Build Bridges, Not Missiles campaign took grip all over the nation, and legislators were besieged by popular calls for disarmament. Following the AFL and CIO and the Teamsters, all major labor unions struck so-called defense plants, refusing to fuel the arms race and demanding the retooling of weapons industries. Chinese artists and dance troupes were invited to perform on North American and European tours, as were Russian sports teams and ballet companies. Rock and jazz bands toured the East, holding huge dance fests in stadiums and arenas. Elvis Presley, now a dark Negro, became the world's most popular and beloved entertainer, and Yevtushenko, the world's poet laureate. East and West were for the first time harmonious. Very soon, the hatred engendered by nationalism, racism, and militarism had diminished greatly among the millions and millions of world citizens. International folk music became as popular as rock and roll. The United Nations launched an international exchange program in which 1 million high school students from the United States and Western Europe clamored to exchange places with schools and families in the Eastern Bloc countries and the Third World. In the haunts of the powerful, however, the reactions to the wave of peace and understanding launched via television was met with anger and derision. From Mount Olympus, Alexander watched as in the Pentagon, the Kremlin, the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, in corporate boardrooms and stock exchanges of the world capitalists, industrialists, politicians, generals, admirals, archbishops, and certain popular film stars sought to stem the rising tide of goodness and understanding. In Washington, the CIA strained its resources to discover how the KGB could exert such powerful and inexplicable control over television. In Moscow, a similar reaction seized the KGB. Dozens of television executives and technicians had been arrested, but no trace of CIA fascist plot could be detected. Members of Congress and of the Politburo called for the elimination of all television, and Alexander laughed heartily when television was outlawed worldwide in 1960. National governments turned to the United Nations for leadership as Dr. Paul Van Noord, the charismatic Secretary General, organized and directed great programs for peace and the improvement of world health, welfare, and education. The decade of the 60s was later called by some the Great and Beautiful Silence. The effect of Alexander's experiment with tolerance and understanding and peace had taken root, it seemed, however, only among the working classes. Without television, the ideals that all people deserved equality, that peace was infinitely better than war, and that minorities enriched majorities were discussed and accepted and extolled in books, poetry, plays, and all art forms, which, in the absence of television, flourished. An explosion of progressive, imaginative, and stimulating ideas burgeoned. Shanghai, Vladivostok, and Jakarta saw the resurrection of popular performances. All across the world, street plays, poetry readings, and a spate of imaginative novels printed in pulp editions and selling for pennies. Across the African continent, songs and dances celebrated Uhuru, as ships and airplanes from the northern hemispheres unloaded experts with agricultural technology and supplies poured in. All over the African and South American continents, constructions of schools, hospitals, railroads, affordable, healthy housing units, irrigation projects, and outdoor theaters and stages for the rising popular arts burgeoned. And all over the world, people united against the machinery of the states, the industrialists, even the structures and leaders of organized religions. Soldiers deserted military units by the tens of thousands, returning to the villages and cities to join the great restructuring as grassroots leaders united to shift community efforts to the causes of humanity and peace. The United Nations declared desertion from military units to be the model of good world citizenship, and a medal was struck to honor the millions of ex-military. Warships were left at anchor without crews. Fleets of fighter and bomber aircraft were left unattended, falling to corrosion, weather damage, and vandalism. Cathedrals, mosques, and temples became common usage areas for communities as many priests, nuns, ministers, and imams quietly looked for honest work in the theater, acting being a profession in which they were not unschooled. By 1978, a new standard had evolved. There was no war. The human condition in what had been called the Third World had been elevated beyond misery. As the driving force of the restructuring had been grassroots work and art for peace and community, it was thought that perhaps mankind at last was mature enough for television. After all, had not this dormant giant, this marvelous medium, once shaped collective thought with effortless ease? Imagine, proposed the advocates for the renewal of television, imagine television as a force for goodness in the new enlightened world. The Secretary General was convinced by advocates for television to lift the ban, however, on a trial basis. 6 months. The trial would last 6 months. If at the end of the trial period, should there be any adverse effects evident, we pull the plug, declared the Secretary General. Thus, television was restored worldwide as the perfect agent to present the marvels of the arts from all lands to all people. The effect was immediate. Singly and in groups, people sat before their television receivers installed in theaters, apartments, and village centers. Initially, prime-time broadcasts featured only the culture of art and educational programming. There were nightly shows featuring folk dances from Chile, puppet shows from Indonesia, Icelandic choirs, opera from Italy and Austria, rock and roll from America, Russian ballet filled the schedules. But quite soon, after the introduction of athletics, soccer, hockey, baseball, and the myriad of lesser sports dominated the schedules. No more were viewers passive. Competition on the screens roiled viewers who yelled at the flickering boxes, cheering teams, and even cursing officials. The world was shocked at the first large-scale violence in years as tens of thousands of soccer fans rioted after the Olympic Games. In Rome, the Vatican was sacked by mobs of angry fans upset by Italy's loss to Brazil. Televised coverage of these troubles exacerbated the violence and senseless anger, and like some dark catalyst, television unleashed a lethal virus that spread stupidity and violence the world over. Soon, soccer riots, race riots, food riots, and senseless bombings plagued cities and towns on every continent. 5 months into the television experiment, the worst tragedy yet occurred when a military aircraft crashed into the United Nations building in New York, killing nearly 1,000, including Secretary General Van Noord. With the destruction of the United Nations, General Mobutu Nwaing, former police chief of Lagos, seized control of NetSatcom, gaining control of worldwide television. To quell this terrible spasm of world ire, he reintroduced public service announcements urging peace and order through strength, cleverly guiding young men towards the benefit of military service, promising glory, uniforms, adventure, and generous pensions. Supported by the guile of slick public service announcements showing General Mobutu as a great leader and a man of the people, he declared himself benevolent Secretary General of planet Earth. Facing Zeus, Alexander shrugged his shoulders. Can you believe this? At least I gave it a try. While I cannot see the future, Zeus, I believe I know where this is headed. Why not just turn the whole catastrophe that is mankind over to Hades? Zeus looked knowingly at Hades. The two gods smiled and then laughed heartily. Oh, Alexander! Ha ha ha! The joke's on you, my boy. It's been in Hades' hands from the beginning of your long nap. Ho 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 ho! Zeus wiped a tear from his eye. Where do you think all these assholes came from anyway? Oh, don't take it so hard, Alexander. I know how you hope for mankind, but man has been flawed from his very beginning. Now the seas will be clean once again. Rainforests will restore themselves unimpeded, and left to just us gods, no animals will be hunted or starved into extinction. Magnificent work, Hades. Truly godlike. Oh, but I love a good joke. Let 'em suffer. That's what they've proved they're best at. I promise you, Alexander, it gets a lot worse before every man is completely consumed by his stupid adherence to self, to nationalism and greed. But wait, Alexander, it's only men who will perish. Oh, this is so funny, I can't stop laughing. Women, I instructed Hades, are to survive. There will be women, women only. Let's see how this works. How amusing can this get? Ganymede, where's that boy? Ganymede, I say, bring wine for all of us, boy.